And when people are in power and they are under this religion of environmentalism, which doesn't recognize dominion and the use of the resources, and you did this beautifully in your article about consciousness and what separates us from the resource, the human being, God's creation. So, I mean, this is, people say, oh, it's a religion. No, it is a religion, and we better start offering some challenges to the president's blind statements when it comes to these statements that, oh, it's global warming, climate change, or we're going to do this. And I guess the only way that truly happens is when the people that are getting hit the hardest make the most noise, and sooner or later that matriculates to the rest of us if it's dealing with energy prices, for example, and then everybody rises up and says, okay, now what we need to do. And then you get ideas like price controls. I mean, there's a emotion and a crisis mode of thinking that will oftentimes totally ignore the right solution. And it's, I don't know how else to put that. And I know I sound like Captain Obvious here, Professor, but it seems that we don't, when we get to the crisis, all of a sudden we're doing things to exacerbate it rather than to fix it. Historically speaking as an historian, when do societies learn? How do societies learn?
They learn the same way a balky mule learns. Something comes up and hits them upside the head with a stick. And the thing to remember about, the agricultural industry that people forget, we don't have to have an iPhone, a computer, an iPod, a Kindle. We don't have to have all that stuff. We do have to have food, right? And we are the most blessed people in the history of the planet, because those of us in the industrialized West, because we do not give a thought to the production of food. Even at the time of the founding of this country, 98 out of 100, maybe a little less, spent their time producing food for the 100. Today, fewer than 2 people out of 100 produce the food for the rest of us. Now, that's a modern miracle. That's just an astonishing phenomenon. It makes possible everything else that defines our modern life, right? Because all those people who aren't creating food are out inventing and thinking up of all this stuff and doing all these other jobs that create this wealth. What really, having grown up in this valley, in the midst of this food production, and myself, involved in it, as a child, it always astonishes me that people are so ignorant about the most important product that we have to produce for human life, and that they then entertain these policies that make that harder and harder to do, whether that's banning GM, genetically modified foods, which promises to be even the next great agricultural revolution, miraculous, not just to provide adequate nutrition for people in the world, but food, volumes of food, but nutrition that they need that they don't get. I mean, the possibilities here are endless, and that it's being blocked by the same cult. I don't call it a religion anymore. That dignifies it too much. It's a cult, right? This cult that is indulged because people can afford it, because they don't pay the price for it. When that land is taken out of production, that is here now, maybe up to a third of the land, their jobs aren't going to be lost like the jobs of the Mexican farm workers in the West Valley. Their businesses aren't going to go collapse because of those small towns that will because of that. And that's what really angers me, is that these people, mostly on the left, who talk all of this, we love the little people, we care about them, et cetera, that they turn around and endorse policies and push policies that harm them. And that's what I want to see people, call them to account on.
Well, it's amazing that what they'll do to the people of Africa on the continent, and you sit there and say they're not allowing them to, they're claiming to have the moral high ground, and yet they could prevent malaria. They could do, I mean, with the GMO issue, I've never, the genetically modified food issue, I don't understand, but I always know when they're protesting, because they're dressed up in those silly suits and they're obstructing the law. And what gets me is, and perhaps this is just a feeling. We just played the torches where the people went. Eight folks went with torches to the oil exec's house and threatened them. And I think to myself, okay, well, this is when you use power in the way you do this. And I recognize it's not the same thing as the federal government being using and abusing the federal government, but in the foundation of the fact of the idea is you don't have the ability to convince me. So either you have to shout me down or you have to try to shove it down my throat. Right. And the only thing that really prevents that is the rule of law. And I see that being undermined consistently, which goes back to the original question.
Right.
Is this a trend? And when the president does it, does that have a ripple effect everywhere?
Well, in the sense that, all the agencies, the number of and power of which, would have horrified the founders, in which he sets the direction for those agencies, as we've seen with the IRS and its hijinks and the DOJ and what it's up to. Fortunately, we have elections, and things can shift and be restored. But, here's one point about that people need to remember, because I don't know if you've heard now the defense coming out of Jay Carney and the White House spokesman and the left of their defense of Obama's pin and phone, imperial presidency is like, well, we weren't as bad as George Bush. Or, well, gee, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Here's what they're forgetting. The Constitution says the commander-in-chief in times of war or civil insurrection has broader powers than usual. That's different. George Bush, after 9/11, some of the executive orders and some of the policies he put in place, what Abraham Lincoln did, that was because we were at war at some level. And that's constitutional. We may think that that's, we need to watch that. We shouldn't let it be abused, et cetera, but it has a much better constitutional foundation than does in domestic policy and domestic agencies' behavior to do that. But again, this is the old progressive ideal going back to Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. It's Woodrow Wilson who complained in one of his writings that the American president can only veto bad laws, but he can't make good laws. Exactly, because the Constitution said Congress makes the laws. TR, he wanted to expand presidential power because the democratic political process was too slow. FDR, we all know what he tried to do with the Supreme Court in order to maximize. Right. So this is in their DNA. This is in the progressive DNA, right? And they have to be pushed back on. They have to be punished electorally. We have to constantly harp on that this is exactly what the founders wanted to prevent, was encroaching power, centralized power, right? Because they saw that as always the precondition of tyranny.
And as we can relate to this, the idea that the more direct the power, the closer the power is to the people, the more accountable it will be.
Exactly.
And
yes.
And what I appreciate about your work, Professor, is you're outlining different portions. You'll cover immigration. You've written extensively about the history of foreign policy and war. You've written about, in the book previous to, I believe, the appeasement, wages of appeasement, you wrote about the welfare state of Europe and what could happen. And so what I'm getting at in closing tonight is we've got to educate ourselves. We do have a call as Americans, without hyphens, to get involved and become a part of things and to get involved and engage and not tune out, especially when we have the greatest opportunity comparatively to the rest of the world to do so. And Professor, we appreciate you and giving us the resources to do so. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks,
Take
Frank.
care. Great to be with you, sir. Praying Durham's nothing but truth. Have a wonderful Valentine's Day weekend. And live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart, and always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. Remember to be salt and light. Don't lose your saltiness. Speak truth in love and know that God created you. He loves you. You're worth it wherever you're at, and you have great gifts. You're unique. AFR Talk.